I'm just checking that's recording. Okay. I have apologies for Miranda Alcock, Suzanne Ranking, Tom Smearden, James Thomas, Jane Dale, Neil Hayward, Chris Ketley, and Dami Deo.
Okay, thank you. No governor apologies?
Just a Miranda.
Oh, just Miranda. Okay.
Yeah.
And just before I ask for declarations of interest, just a couple of thanks, really. Two governors who are not continuing. One is Ifti Chowdhury, who has given up his council seat and therefore is no longer the Runnymede representative. And we've asked Runnymede for a new nomination, and we're awaiting that at the moment. So our thanks to formal thanks go to Ifti for his contribution. And also Tom Allen, who's resigned as volunteer staff governor, and we will be running the normal, it was due anyway, the normal election in October, is it, Anu? November.
Yes, that's right, yes. October, November, the election will run.
Yeah, and so thanks to Tom for that, and thanks that he's also carrying on as a volunteer, which is great. Chris, you've got your hand up.
I don't know if you want to get to be given a name in case you want to veto. But I can tell you that Runnymede has actually chosen a councillor to be the new appointed governor for Runnymede.
And who is that?
I don't know if Andy wants me to name a name now, or do you get a veto, Andy?
No, we don't get a. You don't veto candidates, unless they've got three heads. Who's acceptable?
It's Mark Adams, who's my vice chair on community services. So you basically get two councillors for the price of one.
Well, there you go. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
And we're awaiting Surrey County Council formal nomination as to whether Sinead will be carrying on or not in her role from Surrey County Council. When I spoke to her last week, I think she was, they hadn't had the meeting yet. So undoubtedly they will let us know in due course. It could be Sinead carrying on.
You've got me for another year as well.
Oh, fantastic.
Oh, well done. Well, good. I hadn't realised you were up for election.
No, I wasn't up for election, but we do a reselection every year. And it's a 3-year term, so I will finish next year. That'll be it. But I'll be very pleased to be with you for another year.
Well, we're delighted to have you still, then.
Thank you.
Oh, good. So that's the round of governor changes. So any declaration of interest in anything that's on the agenda, please? No. Okay. So we'll go to minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 3rd of March 2021 via Teams. I'm going to ask for any comments on page 1. Just pop your yellow hands up if you've got any amendments. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, page 8, page 9, and 10, page 11, and finally page 12. So no comment on those. Can I take those as agreed then, please? Well done, Anu. Good set of minutes. So matters arising. Let's have a look. I think the only matter arising was a comment for all to speak with Ifti or Chris if interested in joining the Forest of Memories. And certainly we had a conversation with IFTI, myself and Suzanne afterwards. So I think we can take that off the action list now. Surrey Safe Care, yes, we will. That was discussed at membership and community group. Anu, was there any action that came out of that?
Yeah, so we decided to wait until things were slightly better on the pandemic side, so and then arrange something soon, hopefully.
So should we keep this action open then?
Okay.
Okay. All right. So next is the feedback from governors section. Danny, do you want to take us through the activities?
I'm assuming that people will have read it, although it's not been that easy. We're still virtual, but we have been attending committees, we have been attending meetings and events, and dipping in and out of the Pride in Nursing Day was lovely. And I happened to miss the medal given to Charlotte Broughton. And I was upset about that. Having dipped in and out, why did I miss the one thing that really was good? I mean, yes, it was all good, but that was personal, and it was us, and it was a national silver medal, so that was great. Other than that, we are still going, and we are doing NED catch-ups, and we're doing NED appointments and interviews, and it's all happening, so we're still there.
Thank you, Danny. Louise.
Yeah, Church, just to say that the whole of the Pride in Nursing Day was recorded. So whilst there was both people on site, they also had quite a lot of virtual visitors. So they recorded all of the event, Danny. So I'm sure we can get hold of that part for you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Louise. Lovely.
Yes, and it was great to see Charlotte being honoured in that way. And of course, having had the silver medal for Gemma in the midwives section, and now we've got the silver medal for Charlotte in the nursing one. So that's 2 silver medals. Very good. I should have said, by the way, that Louise is standing in for Suzanne today. So all the difficult questions, please, to Louise.
Yes.
And I'll pass them all on to Simon.
That's fair enough.
That's the art of delegation, Louise. You've learned that. Okay, so thank you about the governor activities. And from my perspective as chair, I've been delighted to see so many governors really supporting all the different things, be it the committees, the NED appointments, the NED governor meetings, etc. So well done, everybody. I know virtual isn't easy all the time, and it has its moments, but it's great to see you all involved. So, Chris, I'm going to hand over to you for the patient experience group.
Yes, Danny's been so admirably brief that I'll try to curtail my even brief comments that I had here. But so you have the minutes of the last PEG meeting laid before you, and I'm grateful as usual to Anu for her expert preparation of these. So I was going to be brief. I'll try to be even briefer. I think the main highlight was the virtual visit by Nick Shah and Paul Darling-Wills, giving us a detailed introduction to the work of the respect process and the ability to discuss some personal experiences with both respect and the previous DNR approach. As I say, I'll curtail the comments I was going to make, but it was a very helpful session, and I think we learned a lot, and we're grateful for the time that both Nick and Paul gave to the PEG in order to deal with what is quite a difficult and sometimes emotional subject. I think it would be remiss of me not to highlight on page 5 some issues that were raised initially by Tom Allen, but there were some other governors who expressed some other concerns as well. in terms of telephone book appointments and the appointments process perhaps still needs some work. And indeed, I've had feedback since then from constituents, if you like, about appointments and lost appointments myself. But of course, we'll go in. We'll follow up with each of those individually. So to return to the positive though, because there was much positive there. Chris Marks was diligent in highlighting the amount of positive feedback and feedback devoted to compliments that is included nowadays in the quality report, and we were pleased to hear that that's going to become more of a feature going forward, so that there's positive reinforcement as well as a focus on the things that need to improve. As I say, Danny's given me a good steer to be brief, so I recognise that this report is laid in front of everybody. Please do look at it in detail. I think the committee continues to do. I'm very, very grateful to colleagues in the Trust for supporting the committee's work going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions for Chris on those minutes, or indeed anything he's raised?
Andy, sorry, I did just forget one other thing that I was noted here that I need to say, which you already mentioned, Tom Allen's retirement from the Council of Governors, but we're also very grateful on PEG for the robust challenge questioning and congratulations that Tom has offered on the committee over the last couple of years.
Thanks, Chris. So any questions for Chris? I don't think he's... Chris, those issues about appointments, has one of the execs taken those away?
Well, the Associate Director of Quality advised that missed appointments and cancellations were tracked and was happy to provide information that was detailed in the performance report.
Okay.
So I would say she is aware and dealing. Whether that changes for the better as we go forward, we will keep you appraised over the next couple of months.
Okay. I've got two hands here. Anu, did you want to add something?
Just wanted to add that we have our appointment centre manager coming to our next PEG meeting to cover off all the concerns that the governor's had.
Oh, that's good result. Thank you, Anu. Rose.
Yeah, hi, Andy. I was looking patients' experience survey when they leave the hospital and they receive the survey about their experience. And in that list, there are no new wards are included there. So I think so that needs to upgrade that survey. Yeah.
Are we talking about the new wards?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. We'll take that on board. Yeah. Anu, can you just make a note of that?
Yes.
Anything else for Chris?
No, I'm done unless anyone else has further questions.
Okay, thank you. And we now move on then, Danny, to the Membership and Community Engagement Group report.
Thank you. Again, I'm assuming that you've read or taken in some of this. Our biggest problem this year, of course, has been virtuality. A lot of people are finding it difficult to attend meetings. Not us, I'm thinking of the general membership of the hospital. People are finding it difficult to attend meetings. So it has been difficult for Anu to actually set stuff up. Although we did get a fair number at the last year's annual meeting. We're still thinking about what to do next. our next big thing, of course, will be the election of extra governors, or sorry, not extra, but replacement governors. And we're hoping to have ideas on meetings that we could have a general members meeting that could be held, I won't say safely because that's not right, but more conducively for the members to come. It's not been easy for the general membership of the hospital to be involved in what's going on at the moment, which is a shame. And it's meant, of course, that we haven't been able to, what do I call it, tout for membership as we used to do, as we have been known to do in the past. But hopefully it won't last much longer.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Danny. I think that let's hope post 21st of June that things ease more, subject to the, I've forgotten what it's called. Is it the Epsilon variant now? We can't call it the Indian variant anymore.
Indian variant, yeah.
It's now got a Greek letter, but I've now mixed up.
It's Delta.
It's Delta, is it? The Vietnamese one is the Epsilon, I think. Anyway, okay. So, and of course, you know, if the Prime Minister does ease things on the 21st of June, perhaps we can look at having a meeting in Chertsey House, keep it away from the main hospital block.
Yes.
I know. So
be good. Yes.
I think we can. We'll take it as depending on what happens on the 21st of June. I think. David.
Well, it's just a question for Danny. Do you think there's any other ways of engaging with the community to gain members rather than bringing them all on site? Because I think we do have to look. We do have to learn from what we've been through, and just, you know, maybe something that we haven't exploited as much as we should do. And I just wondered whether you'd had any ideas about that, because there is risks for bringing lots of people on site, and you know, as we all know, there's a big debate about what the decision should be made on the 21st of June.
Yes.
And I just wonder whether we should have a real think and view that, see if there's other things that we could be doing, Danny.
Yeah, I would agree with you, but unfortunately, if I said the age of our general membership, and I am numbered amongst them, I look at an email and I go, oh yes, that's interesting. I park it to one side and forget about it completely. Whereas if it was an invite to go somewhere, I possibly would do it. But that's, yeah, that's one of the problems. And of course, if we're talking about doing marketing events for each particular constituency, in the past we've had no response whatsoever. The best response is standing in the foyer of the hospital and catching people as they come in or leave, or the careers days we've had. They have always been the best way.
I suppose my only observation, Danny, would be is that's the way we've always recruited the people we've always recruited. And,
yes,
and it just might be worth reflecting. There might be. I'm just asking. You know, it might be we widen the interest by looking at different vehicles, which won't suit everyone, but they will suit different people.
No,
So.
I am open to any ideas, but at the moment we've had no ideas.
Well, I'm wondering if we can link up our recruiting efforts and our grow your own efforts and going into the schools with this as well, because it'd be great to get some younger members as well, wouldn't it? Mm-hmm. So I think perhaps linking up the kind of your side, Louise, with the members side might be helpful to get some kind of different thinking in, because Danny's absolutely right about that age group, but then we also want to bring in other age groups.
Yes.
Yeah, happy to work with Anu to see if there's some opportunities for us to do that together.
Thanks for the prompt, David. That's really helpful. Anything else for Danny while she's on? Okay, thank you, Danny. So we're now going to move on to the performance section. Those of you who sat in on the board meeting last week will, of course, have seen a lot of this report, which is the report that goes to board. And I would urge governors to take the opportunity when they're available to either attend the board meeting personally, in terms of virtually at the moment, or just catch up with it. It's on YouTube, so it's there. You don't have to sit through the whole lot. You can fast forward bits to the bits that interest you. So I'm going to hand over to Louise to take us through this.
I didn't even think of that, Andy. I could have played Suzanne at the board last week doing her presentation of this paper, because no doubt she'll have done it a lot better than I will. But thank you, Andy. So the Chief Exec report, and you'll notice that this is an evolving report that Suzanne is attempting to do in a different way for board colleagues and for Councillor Governor colleagues. And what you see in front of you is a summary. There's three parts to the paper. In the first part, it's a summary view and oversight of the strategic objectives, a view of the board assurance framework and the risks associated with delivery of those strategic objectives, and then a description around how we're mitigating those risks. And I think what you'll see in the first part of this report is quite a deal of risk in relation to our ability to deliver against the quality of care strategic objective in particular. And that's not a surprise to you, I'm sure, given that we are still coming out of a pandemic and the issues that has in terms of delivery of high quality patient care. So the first section describes those pieces around quality of care. As you are aware, we are.
Sorry, Louise, did you mean to share it at this point?
I didn't share it. David Carpenter did.
Oh, David, could you stop sharing that?
I hope I have now.
We're just waiting for it to subside. Carry on, Louise.
So I guess in terms of current situation around COVID, we've got low numbers. I think we've got one person in the hospital at the moment who is an inpatient with COVID. So significantly different to where we found ourselves when we last met with you. And recovery of our elective services remains our priority. However, as we've seen over the last 18 months, this situation is highly volatile. We've got the bank holiday at the moment. We've got half term. People are keeping a close eye on the Delta variant, which is as you say, the Indian variant, and keeping an eye on whether or not that increases. Because obviously, if that does, then that will have a further impact on our ability to be able to restore our services. And I think part of the narrative that Suzanne describes around quality of care is both the risk in terms of us being able to provide good quality care, but also the impact that it has on our people. So very much a description around this ongoing response to the pandemic, and now the recovery phase that we're trying to go through, and the impact that has on our workforce, and the requirement for the people committee to be assured of the wellbeing support that we're giving to people, and the way in which we're trying to support people through this recovery phase. Can everybody still see those slides, or is it just me?
No, they're still there, David.
Shall I carry on? So in addition to the issues around quality of care and people, obviously Modern Healthcare Committee have started to consider the issues in financial terms, and there's a separate part in this paper which I'm going to get Simon to talk to around the financial issues. But obviously the summary of that in Suzanne's executive summary is that piece around capital spend and limitations on capital, which when the paper was written is as per the description in your paper, but actually there has been some movement to that since the paper's been written. So we are hopeful that there may be some shift in our ability to spend capital as a system, but it's still not going to be as we had hoped. So the impact that then has on some of our plans to refurbish the theatres and Abbey Wing, for example, our ED refurbishment, etc. So really big schemes that have both a safety and quality impact if we don't do them. And again, the impact that then has on our people who are expecting that we're able to deliver on those capital schemes. But Simon can pick up the further details in terms of finance in a minute, if that's okay. And then obviously from a digital perspective, again, we see the programme around Surrey Safe Care starting to accelerate, and our decision making in terms of at what point we will go live, how we do that in a way that ensures that we continue to provide safe patient care, but also how we do that in a way that means that we're able to deliver the transformation that we will get from this programme. So a number of risk factors that we're seeking to mitigate. The second part of the report, I think, is a bit more self-explanatory. It pulls out the particular programmes of work around the strategic objectives and just sort of gives some highlights and gives some detail in relation to those. And then, as I said, the part 3 of the report is a bit more of a detail around our financial issues. So I wondered if Simon could just talk through those in summary, and then we can go to questions.
Sure, Louise. So I guess the paper itself looks at last year, doesn't it? Which, as Louise has said, was dominated by COVID. We went through 2 phases last year, one where our costs were completely underwritten in roughly the first half of the year. And then the second half of the year when we had budgets set for us based on previous kind of peak spend across the trust. And then costs were topped up for COVID impacts and various other factors. Essentially, that meant more or less that our costs were always going to equal our income. But year on year, if you look at some of the figures, we're up about 50 million in terms of our total spend. So that, I mean, just on one hospital, you can see the scale of resources it's taken to meet the challenges that we've been through last year. I don't think any of the trends within that are particularly unusual in terms of what we spent the money on. We did rather well on the capital front last year. I think we spent just under £40 million, including a substantial amount on the 2 new wards, so the priority assessment or admissions units, the main additional one in there. Sorry, Louise. Various other things like ITU, we expanded substantially. So I guess the message on the finances for last year is we were exactly where we expected to be. Technically, it's a break-even position. There were some impairments on that new capital spend, which kind of forced us into an accounting deficit. But like I say, that wasn't anything that we were particularly concerned about. Moving forward, if I may, Louise, into April. So April's a difficult month in the sense of pulling everything together. So we only get kind of indicative figures. I think it's probably fair to say. We were about 300,000 overspent, so slightly overspent in the month. But again, I wouldn't say that was particularly something to worry about. I'll come on later to things like the elective recovery fund, and I expect those costs to be covered as we move on through the year. So a reasonable kind of start to the new year. Huge challenges ahead though, because we do have to ratchet our spend down, particularly in the second half of the year. And much of those arrangements across the NHS is still being negotiated with the Treasury. So kind of future challenges, but currently okay is kind of the summary, I think.
So perhaps we'll pause there and take questions before we go on to sort of the capital side, Simon, and all that. So, Deb.
Sorry, was it over to me?
Yes, it was, Deborah. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I just didn't catch that. Thank you. So yes, as governors, we looked in some detail at this paper with some interest, and I suppose the language in it raised some concerns to hear about consequent fiscal constraints and derailing of planned improvements is something which, you know, we read with dismay, obviously, as governors. And I understand from what Louise has just said that it's something to do with the capital as a system, or Simon saying that capital is a system, which is the constraint, as opposed to that we haven't got the money. It's how we use our money, which is the issue. And I suppose that in reading the paper almost opens more questions than it does answers, to be frank. And I suppose I'm really seeking to have that assurance that those risks that have been identified, perhaps we could see the extended list rather than the summary list, because, as I say, it does raise more questions than answers. And one of the questions which does raise is what happened to the additional money that the government gave us for the emergency centre? Is that constrained in the same area as everything else? And what will be the impact on patient quality and safety if these constraints come into place? And what assurance do we have as governors that these have been mitigated? Thank you.
It's nice to have an easy question to kick off, Deborah. Thanks. Simon.
Quite a lot in there. If I miss a bit, just remind me of the particular point. But essentially, this paper was written right at the point where we were trying to work out the impacts of various constraints that had been pushed, you know, the Treasury and Department of Health and Social Care down to the Surrey Heartlands kind of system. We had plans as a system, so that's all of Surrey Heartlands, you know, Surrey and Sussex, Royal Surrey, Ashford and St Peters, and all the other providers locally, which added up to about £120 million. Surrey and Borders and Ashford and St Peters were the two trusts with the most extensive plans, largely because of the land sales that we did, what, about 3 years ago now, and we were just getting to the point where we were spending that money. So our challenge was that we were trying to spend a lot of money very fast. Clearly, we still had it in our bank account. The money hasn't gone anywhere. It's still there. So the restrictions were on a pace of spend side of things, really. With the system, we've had various discussions with the centre, I guess you'd call it, and those. You know, there's been some relaxation of those hard targets. There's been some slippage of those hard targets. So we expect to be able to proceed with the schemes. We've still got to finish the business cases for those. We've still got to work out the impact of things like the new wards on our ED, so we know exactly what we, you know, that we end up building is the right solution. But I think we've got to a point where, you know, that way forward can be unlocked again. I'm slightly caveating my answers because there's still work for us to do on the exact amounts and when that is, rather than if that is at the moment. So there'll be more on that, no doubt, as you know, in a month or two, as that properly lands and gets underwritten. But I think it's definitely worth saying that we've unlocked to a degree those kind of challenges over the last week or so.
Yeah. Can I just add? Because, you know, the Council of Governors technically holds the non-executives to account on this, that the non-executives were, of course, really concerned on Modern Healthcare Committee and at the board around this. And this is a technical Treasury issue. So the Treasury says to Department of Health, you can only spend X million on capital programmes. That then gets divvied up. And when it came down to Surrey Heartlands, the amount we were allowed were far less than the plans we got. We made, as a system, the great thing was the system pulled together. We had full support from Surrey County Council as well to make representations back. I think the NHS region were also supportive eventually. Certainly Claire Fuller, the Senior Responsible Officer, has met with Jeremy Hunt to take his view as well. As of yesterday with the Chairs Forum, things, as Simon said, we're looking a little better, but as yet they're not nailed down. They're not, and so the paper here reflected, as say, a week ago, and it's uncertain because that's how it was. I think, Simon, you one of the other questions was the PAU money, the 15 million.
So we were given additionally, so over and above our previous spend, last year 9 million, and in the current year a further 6. That's to re-provide those towards, there was other works around the edges, so we did a bit of paediatrics work, for example, new doors within the ED unit, extra waiting space in the UTC, for example, around the edges. And that solution needs to be complementary with the ED, which is why we need to be careful that our final plan for the ED refurbishment, and indeed its expansion, including diagnostics and any other elements, is absolutely the right plan for us. So at the moment, that's been working through with the clinical teams. The architects are finalising their drawings, but it's yet to proceed through, the business case and the rest of those approval arrangements, and no doubt come to yourselves in due course as well. So that's the bit. It's that refurbishment side of the ED department that may well be slightly slowed down. So we won't be progressing that within this financial year, but we expect at the moment to begin that next year in whatever form it's ultimately agreed. So at the moment, I think of those original capital receipts, there's about 25 million that's left. And really, it's our future decision making around that which has been caught up in these kind of national discussions, really. And yeah, we're doing everything we can to make sure that that's fairly and appropriately spent in future. I think the other thing to say, there's a bit of local negotiation in this. So we have, as a system, we've now got to consider not just our investments, but Surrey and Borders in particular as the other site that had major new investment plans. So, the importance of mental health, versus physical health, and those sort of debates are intertwined into this. And clearly, we're quite supportive of trying to improve Surrey and Borders offering as well as develop our own services. So there'll be more on that, no doubt, down the line as well. I think I've kind of answered your questions, but I better check that.
Thank you very much. I think it just shows how quickly things move on in the pace of just a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
keeping this up to date is very challenging. Can I just, come back on the comment made about safety and quality, just to the extent of this assurance that quality and safety is not going to go down as a result of this, but perhaps our opportunities to improve it yet further are maybe impacted. Is that the case?
I'd absolutely hope so, but and David wants to come in, so I'll let him have first go. Maybe I can add a. David.
Yeah, I mean, Deborah, I think that's a really good question, and a lot of the plans were to deal with quality issues that we've got, which we've talked about going forward. The overcrowding in the A&E department is a very key example of that, and the maternity theatres need for quality measures. So not doing it won't mean that things will deteriorate, but there are very needed areas that need to improve. And if we aren't able to do this, we need to work out how we can. And that was what we were working through before, is what are the key priorities that we really have to put in the bucket of we need to really get on and do these within that envelope. As Simon and Louise have said, it's an evolving picture on a weekly basis. So hopefully things will improve and allow us to do more of the things that we need to do.
And I think two things to add, really. One is the whole pushback to the centre to get more money was based on quality and safety. Absolutely. And we, in terms of improvements in maternity safety and A&E safety, and the CQC, who were at our board meeting on Thursday, were very interested in that, not unreasonably. So we are pushing as hard as we can on the quality and safety line. And the second one was something that Louise mentioned that you may have missed, but it's very downheartening to our A&E staff to be told, you're going to have this great new facility, etc., etc. Yes, they've got the PAU, that will be built and all the new bits built, but you're also going to get refurbished and refurbish UTC, etc., etc., and then be told, it's all going to be pushed further out. And that's a real impact on people, who are really looking forward to this. So there's a staff impact as well as a patient quality impact, and I think we shouldn't underestimate that. But I can assure you the whole board, absolutely the whole board, will push as hard as we can. And to be fair, the system is completely supportive of this as well and has been pushing. So we will do what we can, but ultimately the Treasury holds the key.
Many thanks. Thank you.
Chair, if I may as well, we'll still be investing in the Surrey Safe Care kind of programme. That's a significant amount of money next year in terms of improving our IT kind of systems, and at the heart of them is clearly safety as well. So, you know, ultimately we're still spending something like 22.5 million in the coming year of capital. That's probably double our historic level of spend. So we're still making progress, I think is the message there.
Chris Marks has been waiting patiently with his hand up. Chris.
Thanks very much, Andy. I can assure you, I was similarly intrigued by Deborah's question, and you won't be surprised to hear that the next question is financially directed, and it's really just to inquire of the non-executive directors how comfortable and how assured they are by the phrase in the financial statement around not necessarily reflecting the trust's underlying financial position, which seems to have a myriad of different interpretations. And I wonder if the non-execs can give some clarity around their understanding of the implications of that.
Okay,
yes, Chris, it's
Merrick.
Yeah. The reality is we've been existing in the last 12 months in a completely abnormal fashion, both from the nature of the workflows through the hospital and therefore the spend patterns, and of course the income side as well. At the same time, we were on a programme which was before COVID to set up Ashford as the site which would be unaffected by winter, and now of course COVID has come along. All of that of course has to factor into we're coming out of COVID, touch wood it continues to do so, and those new spending patterns and reversion to degrees of old spending patterns, old degrees of operating levels, will have their own story to tell that will bear out in the financials. Of course, we're doing this within a system context now, and it is the money within Surrey Heartlands as a whole that we need to think about as a whole. In the past, Simon and the rest of the exec have always been successful in lobbying where required for additional funds, and we've balanced our numbers. That now will be done, but in a different context. So it's difficult to predict the future on how this will unwind. What I can assure you is that at Modern Hospital Committee in particular, we are focusing on this, you know, in detail, subject to the available detail, which will evolve. So I think we're going to be looking at numbers in a good deal more detail over the coming months than perhaps we've been able to over past months. But there's a lot of change, operational change in the hospital, and difficult to fully predict how that will flow through. Chris, does that answer your question?
I guess it's the nature of the phrase underlying that causes me the consternation of and seeking your assurance, because that underlying financial position is so important to laddering up to the quality of care the patients get within the modern healthcare, and it's just making sure that or seeking the reassurance that you guys are comfortable with what the underlying financial position is.
Well, I think the underlying, as I've tried to illustrate, is something that is going to evolve. You know, we've got a Ashford operating in a very different fashion to what it was operating way before COVID. Yes, that was planned, of course. We've got red and green having to run through for the foreseeable future in A&E and other parts of the hospital. All of these are new operating models. So I'm not sure I can talk more unless Marcin, you've got something to add on effectively your focus on this word underlying. I think
I think the honest truth, just sorry, Marcin, I'll just get, the honest truth is before we know the financial settlement, we can't know what the impact is. And, you know, the execs, never mind the non-execs, the execs don't know that yet because it's still being negotiated. And what the centre will decide can have a huge effect down at trust level. It's a bit like a wave. So I don't think we can give you the full assurance that you're seeking. Okay. What we can give you the assurance of is that both non-execs and execs are on it, and it is a major focus. Sorry, Marcin, I cut across you, please.
Thank you. As the other non-exec on modern healthcare, I want to just get my angle on this and what I'm doing with Simon. Andy's right, there's a few numbers and things that we are waiting for nationally to tell us. So for instance, are they funding the extra cost of oxygen? Are they funding some of these extra costs? But one of the issues we do know is our efficiency and productivity rates are down due to some of the IPC controls. And it's something I'm working with Simon on as a NED to get a bit more assurance on how we reintroduce productivity and efficiency, because I think we haven't been able to manage and monitor that. The benchmarking data is out of date and some of the denominators are incorrect in the new models. But we have expenditure on a lot of theaters. Our efficiency is down and we need to be looking at this. So rest assured, Simon will tell you, I'm all over this. We had a meeting last week. We've agreed to look at new indicators and new kind of benchmarks on how we get back to a position of understanding our efficiency and productivity. And that's what I would like to add as Merrick's colleague on Modern Health. Thank you, Andy.
And thank you, Marcin. Really clear. And
talking about new money, though, I know Simon's got some a new money to announce that has just come through, hasn't he?
I'm assuming you mean the accelerator fund.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just checking because there's always new money at some point.
I know there's lots of rabbits in your hat.
Okay, we'll do that now then. So the as we recover, all organisations are being pushed and incentivised to do as much work as is possible, particularly on the elective side of things, to catch up, reduce waiting lists. Obviously, whatever is now, there's 5 or 6 million on the national waiting list, and it's up substantially through the COVID period. A whole range of targets have been set for that. I'll cover those when we get to some of the performance report later on, if that's okay. But there's two elements to the incentivisation. One is a tariff-based system. They'll pay us, we'll pay the system 120% of the previous rates to do as much work as we possibly can. And then also they've given various systems around the country what's called accelerator funding to go above and beyond those rates and invest to get to at least 110% of previous activity levels. So I've mentioned quite a bit of numbers in there. It's about 2.5 to 3 million that we as an organisation will receive. Probably a quarter of that is capital, the rest is revenue, and that will help us do as much activity as possible over the remainder of this year. As always, though, you know, there's it's not just free money. We do have to deliver those levels of activity, and there is a kind of performance element within there. So we're on track so far. We should accelerate pretty substantially, particularly from May onwards. And by July, we should be hitting these, you know, high levels.
Okay, Simon, we've got a couple more questions. Sure. Chris Howarth.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Listening to the discussion so far and reflecting on the pre-meeting discussion, I wonder if, I mean, I'm supposed to ask NEDs, but I wonder if NEDs / executives have a view on what the logic might be with the Department for Health and government in terms of the slowdown on the capital spend. I mean, we asked in the pre-meeting ourselves a lot of questions about the strategy that had been set, our understanding of that strategy and the reasons for the capital investment, and understanding why you're being asked to I suppose understanding your understanding of why you're being asked to slow this down. Is it really just a slowdown, or is it a risk mitigation strategy where you might find that that there's some sort of capitalization of revenue items, and therefore capital build might slip? If you could tell us a little bit about that. And I did have a second question, if I can just lob that in at the same time so I don't have to keep coming off mute, which is where Simon's just told us about the extra activity plan through the accelerator. Do you have assurance of your forward ability to recruit enough staff or staff time to be able to deliver that? Because we've heard a lot about staff stress and burnout. We also know that in Chertsey it's possibly hard to recruit the requisite number of staff. So will you be able to find the staffing in order to deliver that 110% of planned activity?
Let me take the first bit, Chris, because politically I don't think we know. You might ask a Conservative councillor, you know, but politically we don't actually know what it is. But I suspect it's, you know, we heard this morning, didn't we, that education had bid for 10 billion and got 1.5. That it's a general belt tightening because of the economic situation and the amount of money spent tackling COVID. You know, and I think it's all departments, including the Department of Health, are being reined in as much as they can. But that is the Neds know. We don't know politically what is behind that, except that the country has spent a huge amount of money, and you know, particularly on capital, because as you know, the Treasury works on cash accounting on a yearly basis, and so the fact that we've got money in the bank is actually neither here nor there to the Treasury, because it's all about what comes in and out during a particular year. So having dealt with them before, that's as much as I can say. I mean, Simon can obviously comment on the accelerator.
I think just on the capital side, we're really caught in a switchover between systems. You know, the reality is we're spending much more on capital than we ever have. Like I say, it was 40 million last year. It would normally be 10. The next 3 years will be at least 23 or 24 million if we get our numbers landed. So we in particular are spending significantly more than we ever have as we develop and expand our services. So I think it depends a little bit on which lens you put on that. You know, from a Treasury point of view, they would say they've been pretty generous to us. From our point of view, we'd say, well, we created the money and we wanted to spend it quicker than we've been allowed to. On the activity levels and staffing, yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it? I mean, clearly, if we can get work through that's efficiency, going back to Marcine's point earlier, so if we book our list properly, we don't waste sessions or time. You know, we've chased people so they turn up for their operation and it happens rather than, you know, something goes wrong and those sort of things, then clearly we can do more activity for the same costs. We will no doubt be into waiting lists, outsourcing and other routes to securing activity as well, though. So, I mean, clearly the onus on us is to do as much as we possibly can, as efficiently as we possibly can, and to utilise all those assets that we've put in place to, you know, over the last year or so to their fullest potential here. But there's no guarantees, I think, on this, and clearly staffing is the constraint that we're most worried about. So, you know, we need to work on that and plan accordingly, Chris.
I'm just mindful of time as well, and this is important, but it's operational. And I do want to focus as well on the strategic later. So I'll take Helen's question, and then we really need to kind of move on. Helen. Are you there, Helen?
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can now.
Terrible connection. It was really, yeah, thank you for this report. It was clearly set out. It was really a suggestion. For me, it would be quite helpful to be able to consult sort of a high level part of your board assurance framework, or top level heat map or whatever. I'm sure you put together for the board meetings anyway. I don't know whether it's accessible through admin control, but in here, obviously, you mention a number of risks moving one way or another, but I think having that top level heat map to look at and to see how it moves by quarter, for me anyway, would, I think, provide a really good overview of where the organisation is. Maybe others don't agree with me, but it's just a suggestion. I think physically we have seen them in these meetings, and I personally found them very helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, Helen. I think we are moving, as you can see from the Chief Executive's report, very much to a risk-based report. And those risks are the strategic risks facing the organisation against our strategic objectives. But I think that we can certainly provide the board assurance framework to the future meetings. I think that, because sometimes when you see them out of context, it's not quite so easy to follow. So I think that's a good suggestion. Louise.
Yeah, and in the meantime, it was just to point people in the direction of the public board papers on the website, because they because that is it within the public board papers already. I think Sal's just written that in the chat as well. So yeah, they are there.
Simon, any last points you want to make on the performance report?
Do you mean the performance section or the main performance report that follows, Andy? Shall I just?
The main performance report.
Okay.
We're up against time here.
Yeah, so I'll be really quick then. I mean, April is clearly a transitional month. With COVID dropping in March, with the electives starting to build up at the latter end of the month. But clearly, we spent a lot of time on trying to encourage our staff to take leave, improve their welfare, recharge their batteries, and everything else in between. So our performance wouldn't recover directly as COVID went down. We didn't go straight into that extra elective work, but we have broadly met the expectations upon us. Clearly, a lot of those targets aren't at the levels we would want, but actually the recovery elements of those targets, so particularly 78 weeks, moving towards 52 weeks, and all those kind of tail ends of waiting lists is where the current effort is, and I believe we're largely on track to meet the kind of national requirements to obviously prioritise that work. So if you want my quickest answer, Andy, then that is it. They will be obviously quick improvements as we go through May, June, and July. I think on a number of those key areas that are highlighted in that report, but maybe that's enough for now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the summary is, we're not where we would wish to be, but post-COVID, we are in the same sort of place that the rest of the country is in, and that Simon's described, we are now, particularly through Ashford, but also at St Peter's, moving to kind of remedy the elective issues, and that's elective around diagnostics, elective around the waiting lists for the individual services. And as always, there's hotspots like ophthalmology, traditionally have been very difficult, but a lot to do, I think, and we've still got a pretty tired workforce to do it with. I'm sure Louise would tell us that. So any particular, I'll obviously take that report as read anyway. It's the same report that went to board and obviously went to Modern Healthcare. But any particular questions on that report, I'll take those. Okay. Look, I think that discussion was very helpful. That needed to be had. The capital thing in particular, I think where we were last week was really disappointing. Really disappointing, where we were facing we've got the cash in the bank, we want to spend it, and we weren't being allowed to spend it. We hope that that's been mitigated somewhat. It won't be mitigated fully, and we do want to do those, particularly the A&E refurbishment and the maternity theatres, as a real improvement to quality. And given the focus of the Ockenden report, those maternity theatres, we really do need to do something about them. Thank you, Louise, and thank you, Simon. for that. We're now going to move on to the statutory section, and the first one is just the Constitution Group minutes, which I'm sure we can just take as read. If anybody's got any questions on those. Probably the simplest set of minutes I've seen in a while. Okay. And then we'll move on then to the evaluation survey. And first of all, a thank you to the governors for actually filling all this in. I think nearly everybody filled it in, and very interesting to look at. So Sal, you're going to take us through this.
Thank you, Andy. I apologise, I'm going to have to keep my camera off because I'm having real connectivity problems. So I hope that's okay. So in brief, most of you will remember that we carried out an effectiveness survey last time in December 2019. So we're a little bit delayed in carrying it out this year. Got slightly waylaid by the pandemic and so on. So yes, thank you to all of you having made your contributions. In summary, we used exactly the same methodology. I think we added one additional question around engagement throughout the pandemic, because it was quite important that we had a measure of whether or not we had improved or deteriorated in terms of our level of engagement or effectiveness of the committee. So we sort of needed a benchmark, if you like. So we used exactly the same methodology, and largely the results or the responses to the questions, which you can see are summarised there, were generally very good. We did have some neutral responses, which is pretty much in line with the spread of responses that we had last time around. And we have included all of the free text comments that governors made here for you to read. So there hasn't been any editing of these. They are reproduced as they were made in the free text section. So just a couple of points really to pick out. The first is that clearly there is an appetite to come back into the trust or to have face-to-face meetings, and it will be important that, as we've already heard in the meeting, it's important that we pay attention to that and to think about how we can start to move safely into a way of bringing our governors back on site or into face-to-face meetings that don't necessarily need to be on site. So that's something that we really need to pay attention to. And the other points that I just wanted to pull out, one really was around a bit of a concerning comment around, I guess you could badge it as meeting etiquette, which we'll need to give some thought around. Obviously, the responses are anonymous that come through to the survey, so we'll need to give some thought as to how we can address one of, I think it's the second comment that you can see in the free text section. And we've got a bit of a split between people feeling that we are giving too much information and we're holding too many meetings, or that there's not enough. And so it might be worthy of some further exploration around frequency, duration and type of engagement or opportunities that we provide for our governor colleagues to partake in. So I think that there's a little bit of work coming out of this, certainly for us to think about. We've detailed two recommendations, obviously, to continue carrying out the evaluation of our induction of new governors, of which the next one will be following our elections in November, to think about how we can continuously improve that. And as I've just mentioned, considering the range and extent of the opportunities for reintroducing face-to-face meetings in a way that feels both inclusive for our governors, but also supports our North Star objective of so they will be our two recommendations, and I'm happy to take any questions, Andy.
Thank you, Sal. Any comments, thoughts on this? I think for me, it seemed as chair that there clearly is, you know, a very strong majority who kind of feel that we're doing more or less the right thing at the right time, and there's clearly one or two people out there who don't feel that, and that's disappointing, personally disappointing. But obviously, you know, anybody who wishes to kind of raise things at any of our meetings are encouraged to do so, absolutely encouraged to do so, or indeed on face-to-face one-to-ones. So, but I think it's very helpful having this. So the recommendations, I think we should do a separate evaluation for induction, because clearly induction is difficult, and it was particularly difficult this time. And yes, we do want to introduce face-to-face meetings, subject to what the Prime Minister says on the 21st of June. But the sooner we can get back to face-to-face meetings for all of us, I think the better. Not for every meeting, but certainly for the majority, and certainly for things like the council.
Thank you, Andy. And can I just say a big thank you to Anu for her hard work on pulling this all together.
Yes, thank you, Anu. And thank you again, all of you who participated. That is really much appreciated, and it'll give us a benchmark for next year. Are we getting better, or are we staying the same, or whatever, which is really important. Okay, so that takes us neatly into the strategy section. Now, we're very fortunate that we've got Jack Wagstaff from Northwest Surrey, the leader of the Northwest Surrey Alliance. I'm hoping he's here. Jack, are you here?
I am.
Great. Otherwise I'd be presenting these slides, and you do them so much better. But just to set the context, really, you will all be aware that the white paper came out early this year. That white paper is introducing quite a lot of change. A lot of change at the integrated care system level, some legislative change around what the ICS can and can't do, what the Secretary of State can and can't do, and setting up various things that Jack will go through. I think the safe thing to say is that the Surrey Heartlands ICS has been engaged fully in these discussions, and that we've pulled together as a system, feeding back to the Department of Health, feeding back to the NHS as to kind of our views on things. Certainly independently, we've also gone back through NHS providers with comments, and they've gone back as well. So there's been a lot of lobbying behind the scenes. I think for a foundation trust, there is nothing explicit that changes the duties of governors or the duties of non-executives. But inevitably, I would say, as a system, the way the system will be configured will introduce changes. And we've just been discussing, haven't we, the capital, whereas it would have been the trust discussing that individually with region. It's very much been the trust and the system working together doing that. So things will change. I'm not sure as to the big thing, but for me, the things that I'm encouraged that Jack's going to talk about are the collaboration piece, because the things that will matter are collaboration at place, where Jack is the leader there, and the collaboration between the acute collaboratives. And I think these two things will take on big momentum of their own as we come through, and the legislation will actually kick in 1st of April next year. So that's just a bit of an intro, Jack. Hope I haven't stolen any of your thunder.
No, that's hugely helpful, Andy. And I think I'll apologise to colleagues who are on the Strategic Change Committee. You will have already seen a very similar presentation once, and apologise twicefold to Simon, Louise and David, who are probably on their third or fourth rendition. So no, they will expect me to at least be polished, and I'm certainly not going to talk for the 35 minutes of the agenda. So there's plenty of time to discuss detail with everyone. I think just in terms of how my my role sort of fits into the overall schemes, and you mentioned my job is to lead and develop our place collaborative across Northwest Surrey, and that's not something that exists in isolation as a separate entity in a separate system with a group of people that doing something over there. It is Ashford and St Peters and the trust and partner organisations like CSH, our GPs, Surrey and Borders, our local councils coming together as a partnership to work out how we do things collaboratively in the future. And my accountability is to those 10 partner organisations and to their chief executives as part of the Alliance board, and then I represent us collectively as part of the Surrey Heartlands ICS leadership team. So it's my job to put our view forward as part of that overall structure. So I'm going to run through a short number of a short presentation, and then hopefully leave plenty of time for discussion. But hopefully that's a helpful intro. And gets the slides up. So hopefully that's coming through for everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the broader policy context. So what's happening nationally and how that impacts us both in Surrey, in Northwest Surrey, and as Ashford and St Peters. A bit about what we've done in terms of forming our collaboration across our part of the geography on the right, and then some of the future direction for us as a partnership in terms of key priorities and key things that we're aiming to deliver. So in terms of the policy context first, so as Andy alluded to already, ICSs are becoming statutory bodies from the next financial year. They'll replace CCGs and absorb a lot of NHS England's delegated functions, so specialist commissioning, a broader relationship with primary care, broader primary care, dental, pharmacy, optometry responsibilities, all and with greater devolution of assurance, so more self-regulation within the ICS footprints. ICSs will execute their business through two main structures. So an ICS NHS board, which oversees the planning, resourcing and accountability for NHS health services, and an ICS partnership board, which is much more wider in its membership and particularly with the local authority and focused on the wider determinants of health and the crossover between socioeconomic and health policy in particular. The focus be on the triple aim across outcomes, experience and finance. And as Andy mentioned, there are two main vehicles for actual delivery of services. And those will be place system collaboratives, so collaboratives like ours around the geography, how do we work together to do the best for the residents of Northwest Surrey and the 4 boroughs within it, and provider collaboratives in terms of how we collaborate across sectors. So about how do we look at services in the context of collaboration between hospitals, or even broader when you're talking about something like mental health and you need to collaborate for highly specialised inpatient care, for example, across a broader footprint. So all of those key elements of the future policy context from next year. There's a roadmap for getting there between now and next April, and the centre is asking all systems to produce a development plan for how they get there. Some of the key things really to mention on here. So obviously they're going through the process of setting out exactly from the NHS England's and the Department of Health perspective exactly how they expect these constructs to look, and they're publishing guidance on that sort of in the next few weeks. We're not expecting it to be anything surprising or contradictory to the sort of strategic direction that we're already on. And then over the course of the next few months, they'll confirm the selection process for key board appointments at an ICS level and so on. I think one of the important changes to note here is at the moment there's an expectation that ICSs are geographically coterminous with the upper tier local authority, and that they're quite clearly identifiable by place. So for us, that's obviously Surrey County Council. So NHS Surrey would be the equivalent ICS authority, and that clearly could have implications for the current configuration of ICSs, where we have Surrey Heath and Farnham as part of Frimley, and always a lot of crossover between East Surrey and Sussex. So that's a really sort of contentious issue around the sort of the future boundaries piece that we're expecting to be resolved one way or the other over the next sort of month or two. Clearly a lot of political interest in that, which will have a lot of influence on that final decision. So for the organisation of Surrey Heartlands as an ICS, Surrey Heartlands has defined a number of place-based systems, and that's for us obviously the Northwest Surrey geography with our partners and our boroughs across that footprint, and an emerging provider collaborative structure based on those areas that we think we can really pragmatically collaborate on. So our key GERFT areas, and particularly our emerging partnership with the Royal Surrey, things like the Surrey Safe Care and others that have laid a really strong sort of foundation for that as we move forwards. Envisage that the ICS will be focused on strategic planning and assurance, and places and collaboratives really focused on the detail of service design, service delivery, how we resource and run and build and develop our services across the partnership going forward. A lot of the technical and detail and how we flow money and accountability across the system, I think, will become clearer in the next few months as that detailed guidance comes down from the centre. I put the sort of ICS leadership structure on here, which I'm not going to run through in detail, but it's provided there for people's information. In terms of some of the other key developments, I mentioned the guidance coming down from the centre at the moment. So there's a framework that sets out how all of this is working, is going to work in detail. Sort of talks about the constructs of boards and how stuff moves around the system from a sort of formal, technical and governance perspective. I've seen an early draft of that with a lot of drafting notes still on it, and as I say, it's broadly in line with the direction we're expecting, but we haven't seen a final version coming out of there. The principles for us is around a lot more strategic outcome-based local autonomy. So I would hope for us in the future to have a much more direct control over all of the health decisions for the planning, organisation and delivery of service, and for the money that goes with that on a Northwest Surrey footprint, and then we work out across partner organisations how we do the best for our people and our workforce within those parameters. So that's what I'm hoping the sort of future dynamic will be. I've mentioned the ongoing boundary discussions, and we're also looking at how we review and sort of future-proof what we're doing to organise the ICS at the moment, and how we work across different partners in the future. So there's a bit of tidying up to do while we wait for the national changes to come into force next year, and the colleagues and Andy in particular has been closely involved in some of that. The central direction has also set a few sort of key priorities. If I don't know if colleagues will have waded through the 100-page-ish of planning guidance and appendices that came out a couple of months back, but essentially they've set 5 key areas of focus. The first is around supporting staff, including recruitment and expansion, but also how we embed greater flexibility and support people in terms of recovery after obviously the intensity of the pandemic. The delivery of the vaccination programme, including the preparation for booster programme in the autumn, and the vaccination of children if approved by the National Committee. recovery and transformation, which of course a lot of our operational focus is on how we recover our waiting list and backlogs in elective care, diagnostics, cancer services. A huge focus on maternity and mental health and learning disability services as well, which have been some of the worst impacted over the last year. Expansion and support of primary care, including how we build greater teams around key practices within community areas, so called primary care networks, but essentially how do we bring GP practices to work closer together and then start to align different teams and different professionals around them to make health services much easier to access and much more holistic, rather than people needing to bounce between different sort of silos of the healthcare and public service. And then the final was a very significant focus on community urgent care and emergency care, so being much more responsive, having a 2-hour response across the board 7 days a week in the community, and the hospital discharge programme, which has been so important in terms of that guaranteed 6-week funding, regardless of it, whether it's health or social care, for everybody coming out of hospital. The future of that programme, along with the promotion of 111 as the sort of the main gateway to access a full range of services. That's a sort of a whistle-stop tour of everything that's set for us as a sort of central direction to the NHS as a whole. I think what's probably more important and more relevant in terms of our direct impact on patient care and direct delivery of services is the direction for our collaboration and alliance across North West Surrey. So over the last year, despite the pandemic, partners have worked together to form the North West Surrey Health and Care Alliance, which is a formal partnership of the 10 organisations that you see there: our Borough Council, the County Council, Ashford and St Peters, CSH Surrey, our community service provider, NICS, our GP Federation, and Woking Zambia Hospice. We've constituted the Alliance Board, basically signed us all up to a shared set of objectives, a way of looking at problems and challenges across the population and being able to solve them and make decisions collectively to enable us to do that. It's one of the largest public sector alliances in the UK, and as I say, we're now working as to how we fit it into to that wider reconfiguration that I've talked about. I think the biggest sort of advantage is in bringing organisations together like this is in allowing us to plan and deliver much more holistically and start to shift our focus towards much more preventative interventions, much more work with our borough councils, much more work within key towns. So we're not looking at sort of the silo things. How do we plan the best pathway for this particular intervention? It's actually much more focused on what are the overall needs of the people of Woking or the people of Staines or the people of Addlestone, and how do we work collectively to make sure we're improving outcomes as much as possible. So it's quite a new ethos and real collective decision making and accountability across a partnership. And I think what's been quite inspiring over the last year is just how much has been achieved, even in increasingly challenging times, in terms of the collaboration across those partner organisations. So we've brought a whole range of stakeholders together to plan a completely new development in Shearwater and start to bring services into that community, into one of our most disadvantaged communities in the patch. Ashford and St Peters, of course, have shifted physio services into leisure centres and expanding that even further into Woking. We've seen a huge difference that's made to people's ability to access services, their engagement with the health service, but also with the local community and local businesses as well. We're investing health resources quite differently, so investing health money into different accommodation options for people who are particularly vulnerable, who've had significant mental health issues, or victims of domestic violence, all problems that have been exacerbated over the course of the pandemic. And in working together and in making decisions collectively, we've been able to invest differently to provide some really quite vital support. The same for voluntary sector transport, to be able to get people around the system to where they need to be as we've reconfigured health services. we're also planning a number of other big developments. So we've got a new Cavell Centre. It's called, essentially a health centre where we can bring a range of different services and preventative services together in Staines. And again, that's a partnership across all of the organisations that will allow us to run things differently, to bring services closer into the communities, and also to aid in some of the shifts we need to make around footfall and infection control within some of our high volume sites across the patch. And it's really allowed us to develop our collaboration with the voluntary sector. So the vaccination programme is a really good example, with Voluntary Action North Surrey provided us with 300 volunteers across the partnership to allow for the delivery of the vaccination programme, which has been a huge partnership effort in and of itself. In the borough councils providing the accommodation, now GP Federation running a lot of the services, CSH providing some of the clinical oversight. Simon provided a lot of equipment from the hospital himself and drove it round to a few of the centres, and the hospice provided some screens when the delivery didn't turn up. So it's been a real partnership effort across those organisations to actually vaccinate, I think, well over 70% of all of our adults across North West Surrey. So making a huge difference to the outcome of the pandemic. And then in terms of that strategy materialising in terms of some of our sort of harder edge service delivery from a health perspective. So partners have agreed a single leadership model across our discharge teams, and appointed a single person to take ownership of collective decision making around social care, therapy services, discharge planning, and community services. And that's on a trajectory for much needed improvement as we move into the back end of the year. We've launched our urgent community response service, the service I mentioned around providing 2-hour care in the community. It's provided care to over 500 people this year, and that's on a trajectory to expand quite significantly over the part of the patch. And David's worked very closely with our hospice colleagues to develop a new medical model across St Peter's and the hospice, which is really quite a pioneering development, in that the hospice actually provide a lot of that specialist medical input in the community, and then reaching into the hospital to deliver the best experience possible. So we're really starting to see tangible change come out of all of that collaboration across organisations, and in the context of an incredibly operationally challenging year, there's a hugely commendable set of real achievements there that are quite rightly recognised. I'm not going to go into loads more, because it's I think you'll all be familiar with these, but I think I stole them from something Suzanne presented to me. So I trust colleagues will be familiar with this, but huge amount of collaboration to move to virtual appointments, to integrate our information systems to allow us to do that, the advice and guidance infrastructure across primary and secondary care, the discharge work to reduce bed occupancy, over 30,000 additional contacts delivered in primary care during wave 2, and a collaboration across NICS and St Peter's to develop a system for monitoring COVID patients at home with oximetry technology and other things. So really the foundations that we've built in terms of bringing those organisations together, and the relationships that have been built and have then allowed us to mobilise this whole set of practical stuff has been a huge asset to us over the course of the pandemic. So in terms of into the next steps, and this is my final slide, we're obviously coming out of an incredibly operationally intense period. So bringing the board and the organisations together to refresh our strategy and set our work programme for this year and onwards. We're finalising the governance and delivery structure, and making sure we've got the right intelligence and outcomes monitoring in place to take stock of what we're doing across the system, and making sure that's making a positive impact. In terms of promoting innovation, I've talked a bit about our placemaking agenda, so making sure that we're focusing on our key towns and key developments and key areas for improvement in a very practical sense, and a different relationship with our borough councils in particular. But also strategic partnerships with education, with industry and local business, and some of our property development work, to think about how we insulate ourselves as much as possible from some of the capital challenges that we've already spoken about a bit today. And we've also got a particular opportunity for how we build shared infrastructure. So as part of that, change to the national structures and the change to ICSs and place-based collaboratives, we're actually able to reconfigure a lot of what the NHS does. So we don't need to have a set of commissioning organisations and a set of provider organisations that negotiate contracts with each other and hold each other to account in a very siloed fashion. Actually, we can think about how we use that resourcing, use that people quite differently. And there's about, for North West Surrey, about £2 million of funding that we can invest in our infrastructure in key areas, such as service transformation, analytics and population health management, and how we develop our workforce and recruit differently across the patch, and how we start to package our services together to make them as accessible and understandable to the public. So we've got some huge opportunities to build new capabilities and build new teams that are much more focused on outcomes and good care for patients, rather than some of the sort of transactional architecture of the NHS. So overall, it's a really exciting time. We've got an opportunity to shape how we think that should work, and how we can sort of reorientate ourselves to work much more collaboratively and with an overall focus on outcomes, rather than some of the sort of the business process that the NHS incentivises historically. So you'll be pleased to know I'm going to shut up at that point and open up to any discussion or questions we might want to pick up.
Thank you, Jack. If you want to stop sharing, and then we can see people. Deborah, you were first in there.
I think because I'm actually just so enthused by it. I think it's brilliant. Thank you, Jack, very much indeed. And having been involved in some of this from both health and from local government, it's lovely to see it all coming together. I'm afraid my question's a little bit dry, and it's related to the governance. So on your third slide, you talked about two board structures, the ICS NHS board and the ICS partnership board with the local government. How do they link? Or are they working in tandem? Because surely then they're not working in silos. Just be interested to know.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair question. I think it's fair to say that when these proposals were originally set out, there were two options: one for two boards split like that, and one for one board that just had the broader stakeholders, but all of the responsibility in one place. And we both as a place, and I think as a Surrey system, felt that one board would have been the more sensible option, but they've continued to sort of split it out as two. And I think, well, my reflection on that is that a lot of the times these restructures are designed for the least functional systems in the country. So there are areas of the country where the NHS and the local authorities don't get on at all, and therefore forcing a single board might not have been conducive to that. So I don't think there's really a good rationale for keeping it like that. I think that is the shape that we're going to get. I think for us, it'll be how we make sure we get the right people, and probably the cross population of the boards, to make sure that they are working sort of collectively rather than in silos, because I think that is a fair risk that common sense would point out to you, which absolutely right.
I think interestingly, I was on an NHS providers call with the NHS England programme director for this, and I think they might be quite permissive about people, you know, that the two sets might meet at the same place at the same time. just sort of say, well, that's one meeting finished and there's another one starting. Certainly in Surrey, I think because we've got such good relationships with Surrey County Council, I think that would probably work. But as Jack rightly says, in other parts of the country, I think there might be a more difficult discussion. But let's hope pragmatism wins out. Michael Smith.
Oh, thank you very much, Andy. I just wanted to ask you, Jack, partly what I was going to ask has been covered in your answer to Debbie. But Woking in the ICS that's proposed is very much out on a limb. It's sticking out as Cornwall sticks out from southern England. And it's within 3 miles of Surrey Heath and within 3 miles of Guildford. And I think you can give us some assurance that the ICS that will cover those areas will be working collaboratively. And the second part of my question is basically, I'm sure you've got very long experience of the NHS. How will the ICS differ fundamentally from the health authorities that used to exist, of which there were 2 in Surrey, East Surrey and West Surrey, and what's the difference going to be? Because those bodies were the commissioners for both primary, secondary and community care.
I think my receding hairline might be creating the impression that I've got more historical knowledge of those structures than I might actually have, Michael.
Oh, I'm sorry if that's offended you.
I'm proceeding in blissful naivety that everything that we do is very, very new and very innovative and hasn't been done before, whereas colleagues who are much more experienced will know that it probably comes around in 5 or 8 year cycles. So I think to be honest, structurally there might not be a great deal of difference. I think the key for us is how we make it work. I think there's a lot of good foundations laid from a structural perspective in terms of the level of autonomy and decision making we might have as a resourcing following that. So I think we've got an opportunity to closely align that decision making resources with frontline clinical care and patient outcomes. I think what one of the things I'm really keen is we try to make everything we're doing as irreversible as possible. So when we are making changes and starting to think about how we practice and how we align functions and how we do things like workforce planning, financial planning and clinical service design, we try to make that as difficult to reverse as possible. So regardless of whether there's another NHS restructure in 5 or 10 years, actually the foundations for our teams on the ground and the way we're working and caring for patients is integrated in a way that would be resilient to that. So that's very much the key bit from there. In terms of the Woking point, so but we do have different place systems in the ICS side. There's my counterpart Louise Stead, who oversees the place partnership for Guildford and Waverley, and we work collectively both as part of the ICS executive team, but also we come together regularly to make sure that we're planning holistically, particularly across our 2 systems, because there's obviously that collaboration and between Royal Surrey and Ashford and St Peters that's so developed, but also that we do have areas like Woking and Guildford where there is a lot of crossover of people between the 2. So not all of those things have got a structural solution, but they do have a people and ways of working and how we choose to practice solution, I think.
I think the other thing to say is that there's nothing in the white paper about taking away patient choice. So no. Patient choice is still there if people choose to go to one. Now I've got 4 hands. Lily's hand is up, although it's not showing. But before I come to Lily, Michael and Chris, David, you've got a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to hopefully answer Michael's question to it, because I've been around quite a bit longer than Jack, and I suppose actually the structure goes back even further than that if you want to look for similarities. But I think I think the important thing is that there's been a cultural change here. So there's not some person deciding what they're going to buy from people. It's a whole group going to work out how we're going to spend the money very wisely. And I think the first time I've been involved in the healthcare system is we're understanding that actually, organisations like us understand that if we spend the money elsewhere, it's better for the population and the communities we serve. And actually, in the end, it's better for our staff and reducing the load of patients coming to our organisation, which is all good. So I think there's, as Jack was alluding to, the structures always look the same because they generally have the same people. But actually, I think the cultural purpose has changed, and that's the big step forward. That as Jack says, we are responsible for holding on to and continuing the work that Jack was describing.
Thanks, David. I think that's very helpful because it's not an organisation that is sitting over a load of competing organisations. I think that's the big thing, isn't it? So, Lily, next.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, given that I represent a constituency that is sitting across 3 local authorities, of which 2 are not members of this ICS, where and how our members sit within this, and what is it that I need to know then about the Frimley and Frimley Health, and I don't know exactly where Surrey Heath belongs.
Yeah, and I think that's something that still needs to be resolved, Lily. To be honest, I think there will be a clear answer in the next couple of months, and I think that will either see the join up of areas like Surrey Heath that are in the county of Surrey into the NHS boundary of Surrey, or it will see Frimley continue to exist as an independent ICS. But those are pretty much the 2 options, and I haven't got a clear understanding or impression of which way that will go at the moment, but we are expecting a clear answer in the next couple of months.
And we have fed back as a trust our views on that because there is a study going on at the moment, and we were all asked for our views. I'm sure you've done yours, Jack, as well, in terms of what we would prefer, and no prizes for guessing what we would prefer, which is.
Can I just ask, where do the patients fit into this whole discussion? Because as patients, there is absolutely no communication with us at all.
Yeah,
I mean, from the government, not here.
And I think there's a few points out. I think there's Andy's made the point that patients still have the right to choose their services and access the services that they want. That hasn't gone away in any structural change to the NHS. I think the second important point for me is we're actually from a Northwest Surrey perspective, actually that exists because actually it's quite a real boundary. It's the natural flow in which where people work and live and access care, certainly from a hospital perspective, and then as we look within our geography around some of those key towns I've mentioned. So I think we need to almost take a very common sense view of some of these areas and say, actually, are these the areas that people live and work and would identify and would naturally access services, and have we planned and delivered to take account of that, and if we haven't, then we should, but I think it needs to be focused much more on that rather than, wherever we draw a boundary, there's always going to be people on one side of the other of it, so we're never going to get that right, but what we can do is make sure we plan our services to be accessible, and to take account of where those realistic flows are, I think.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Lily. I'm very conscious that we're running a bit over time, and poor old Louise is tail end Charlie again. So Chris, your last question, please.
Thanks, Andy, and I'll be very brief. Ultimately, we as governors represent the members who are potential patients or existing patients. Ultimately, how does this improve this whole ICS structure? what is going to be the impact on the things that matter for patients: quality of care, access to care, and waiting times.
Yeah, well, I think that's entirely in our gift, and I think that's the important point. It's what we can't do is see the ICS as something that sits over there and is going to make all the decisions and then tell us whether it's a good, bad, or indifferent impact. So what I'm expecting to happen is actually that that decision making for how services are planned, run, and delivered, and the impact that has for patients is with us as an organisation and as part of the partnership I've talked about, and that we make the direct decisions about how we organise ourselves, how we deliver services, how we look at the needs of our population to do things and it's that has the impact. So I think, yes, there's an NHS structural change process going on, but as David said, the real thing that's going to add the value is us coming together to take a holistic view of how we can better plan and deliver services. I think there's a few very tangible examples, Chris. So I think we've already worked together differently to invest health services in accommodation and different housing solutions and in social prescribers that get people to access different lifestyle interventions that are going to keep them well for longer and reduce the demand on health services, bringing services together in one place, so people don't have to bounce between a GP referral and a community referral and a mental health referral and a therapy referral and an outpatient referral at the trust. We can do that once in one place. So there's a whole range of tangible things we can do, but I think the point is it's in our gift to do that. No one's gonna do it for us.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Chris. I mean, one for me that jumped out this week was the whole discharge planning as well, and having that integrated discharge facility, and at the end of the year, hopefully Surrey Safe Care being in Woking Hospital, being in Royal Surrey Hospital, being in Ashford St Peters, and the seamless move with their relevant information rather than notes will help hugely on that side. So Jack, I'd just like to say thank you for taking your time to come and talk to us as a Council of Governors. We really appreciate that, and your clear explanation of where things are at the moment. Still things to be worked out, of course, but to my mind, a place-based collaboration is absolutely key to improving things for patients. So thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on now to Louise. Sorry, you're a bit late, Louise.
That's okay. And I think Marcin was just going to do a quick short intro as the chair of the People Committee.
Of course, yeah. Marcin.
So I gave highlights at my presentation in May, which was our results. Whilst we had a smaller response rate, we have improved in so many areas, and that's extremely excellent given we were in the middle of a pandemic and the stress on staff. But there are two areas of concern, bullying and harassment and EDI, which is how it linked into my presentation in May. So with that, I want you to know that the People Committee has gone over this in detail. We have seen Louise's team's action plan and how they intend to respond. And as I've said, those two topics are now routine matters on our agenda. And with that, over to you, Louise.
Thanks, Marcin. Is somebody able to share the presentation, or would you like me to do that?
I can share it for you, Louise, if you just
Thank
give me
you,
a
Ali.
second.
Thank you, Sal.
No problem.
So I'll start talking and then we can catch up in terms of the slides. So as Marcin has very eloquently just introduced the item, we did our staff survey, the field work as normal, between October and December of 2020. So obviously quite a remarkable year for staff across the country who were completing this survey. We had less of a response rate, which I partly put down to the fact that we did quite a significant pulse survey around well-being, in the late summer, early autumn. And it could be that people, you know, sort of are quite fatigued by surveys, and could be part of the reason that we had a poorer response rate, certainly than our previous year. However, the results are important. They're always an important barometer for how staff feel. And we started to see some improvement in a range of different themes. And since I did the presentation to the People Committee and the board, there's been some further regional benchmarking data that's been shared with me. And so I've added some of those slides in just for the Council of Governors to see how we fit in the context of the rest of the region. I'm just seeing a blank screen at the moment. Is everybody else? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll carry on. So in terms of response rate, obviously we've had some concerns in relation to that. And the second slide in your pack is a summary of the top 5 in the region and the bottom 5 in the region. Now, we don't fall into the bottom 5 in the region, so that's good. And we can see that places like Surrey and Sussex, so SASH, which is you know, one of our partners in our STP, managed to get 65% response rate. So we will be talking to SASH to understand what they did and trying to build on our work next year. The next 2 slides give you that theme that Marcine's just described of our improving position for Ashford and St Peters. And so you can see both where we think that there's been a statistically significant change, and where there's been not a significant change, but you can see that we haven't had a significant deterioration of those results. I'm happy to sort of take any questions in relation to them at the end, but I think, you know, sort of these slides are quite self-explanatory. So if we go into the next slide, this is one of the ones that I've taken from the regional benchmark. I think Sally's just a bit behind me.
Sorry, Louise, it's clearly not working for me, okay, sharing them. I'm happy to try again if people are willing for me to persist.
I think everybody's had the pack, Louise. So
okay, I'll make that assumption then. So you can see on that slide in particular, Ashford and St Peters, for those of you who've got difficult eyesight, is the one on the left, followed by rural Surrey, then Surrey and Borders, and Surrey and Sussex. And the green indicates the areas whereby we've seen an improvement this year on our scores compared to last year. And so all green for Ashford and St Peters, so great to see that. And then the 2 areas that we've got that Marcine has already identified as being the areas that we are under the national average on, and the 2 that we are concerned about are the equality, diversity and inclusion, and the questions around safe environment, around bullying and harassment. So the next 2 slides, again, I've indicated our progression compared to the rest of the region in relation to both of those items, but clearly areas that we still have a lot more to do on. So I'll go to the next slide, which is this slide around all of the key themes and how we sit in terms of external benchmarks. And as we've already described, 2 main areas that we are under the national average, but for everything else, we're either on the national average or above. And I think in particular, the indicators around staff engagement are really important for us. And I do sort of labour this point when I talk to the board, because actually, if you then look at the next few slides in your pack, you will see a set of bar charts that describes the advocacy questions around would you recommend the trust as a place to work and place to be treated, the contribution to improvement questions. So are you able to show your initiative? Are you able to help make improvements in your job? And the questions around motivation. So enthusiastic about going to work, look forward to going to work. And you can see from 2012 right through to 2020, quite a significant and sustained improvement. So, you know, really good to see that, because it does feel like those improvements are not transient, but they are things that hopefully will stick. If I take you to the last few slides, and actually I think I've sort of repeated myself. I've got the top and bottom score slide and then a 2020 summary, and it's sort of saying the same thing really. So the key improvements for since 2019, we've made some improvements around people's perception of health and well-being and whether the organisation prioritises that. So that's really good to see, because for the last few years, whilst we've done a significant amount of work around the health and well-being agenda, that hasn't necessarily been reflected in the way people have answered those questions in the survey. Our core strengths, and again, really good to see some indicators around retention. I don't often think about leaving this organisation. I look forward to going to work. I'm able to make improvements happen in my work. So that, again, you know, we are concerned about our long-term retention. We know that we've seen some improvements in that over the last 18 months, but we wonder whether that's people waiting before the end of COVID to then think about the next step in their career. So again, our retention indicators are really important for us at the moment. Issues to address, and as we talked about, we continue to see a lack of improvement in the indicators around bullying and harassment, and that is something that we have said we now really do need to have a concentrated focus on what the cultural issues are that leads people to feel in that place, in terms of the relationships with their colleagues or the relationships with their managers. And a recurring theme around needing to work additional hours. And again, what does that mean? Where is that in pockets in the organisation, and how can we improve on that? So the final slide in your deck is a set of actions which are in line with the workforce transformation programme that we've already got in place. So rather than writing an action plan from scratch, we wanted to think about what are the workforce transformation priorities, and you can see those 8 themes that we're working on, and how do we make sure that the actions that we have in the programme of transformation include addressing some of the issues that have come out of the staff survey. And I've detailed under each of those 8 actions some of the key things that we're working on this year that Marcin alluded to at the beginning. So I won't go through those, Andy, but I'm happy to take any questions in relation to any of those.
Okay, thank you, Louise. And as I said, do link it to Marcin's presentation back at the NED Governor meeting as well, where we covered EDI and we covered that. Colin.
Yes, I was a little bit concerned to see that in the staff survey there it's 11% decline from 2019, and also there seems to be little change in scores from 2019 to 2020, and in fact there's a default score of 340 respondents answering to the survey. So it's hard to put a positive note on it, the way the stats read.
So I mean, so I guess the our normal response rate over, you know, I've been employed since 2013, sits around the middle 40s. We were really pleased that in 2019 we managed to get a much better response rate. So we got that up to 54%, and that's the first time we've ever gone over the mid 40s in terms of a response rate. You know, clearly this year that has dipped, and I have tried to give some explanation as to why I think that might be the case. But obviously we will want to find opportunities this year to make sure that we improve on that response rate. Notwithstanding that, I think the statisticians would say that it's still statistically significant numbers of people, and the themes are, you know, if you think about what the themes are telling you in terms of a longitudinal view of the organisation, then I think that's more important than just sort of the immediate here and now. It's about what's it telling us around the experience of our workforce over time, and is that an improving picture, and what do we still need to concentrate on, would be my assessment.
Thanks, Louise. Neil.
Yeah, it seems that in general practice, things are not nearly as good in terms of morale. They're feeling that pressures are even greater than in the worst of COVID, because all the people coming out of the woodwork, who were perhaps not coming forward. And with frustrated patients, the level of abuse has gone up dramatically, and that's led to a real problem of morale. And I just wonder whether, the staff at the hospital have those effects at all. And I was just astonished at basically how good the morale has been in your survey compared to what I'm picking up in general practice.
So I think I sat on the system board meeting this morning for Suzanne, and what I heard was a quite significant increase in activity across the board. So community mental health, primary care, community care, and as we see, I think we had more than 400 attendees in our ED last week for the first time we've ever had that level. So I think the pressure is consistently across the whole of the health care pathway. I think we have started to see a bit of an increase in violence and aggression. So we look at that through Datix. You will probably be aware that a couple of years ago, I launched a body-worn camera pilot where we use body cameras to try to deflect violent and aggressive incidents, but also as a mechanism for recording them. And they've been very successful in places like our emergency department, with our security teams, with some of our frontline reception staff, but also with our intensive care teams, which, I never thought that you'd find that, but lots of violence and aggression from patients in that path, mostly from patients' visitors, when they were allowed to have visitors. Most recently, we've started to see an increase in aggressive behaviour within our paediatric pathway from parents and carers. And so we are thinking about the next phase of the deployment of the body-worn cameras as one way to try to mitigate that. It's not the only way, but it has been proved to be quite a successful way of diffusing a situation in the moment, but also moderating people's behaviours in the moment, because they see themselves. It's a front-facing camera, so you see yourself being aggressive to a camera, but it's also a good way of recording any evidence if that's needed. So I think that staff at Ashford and St Peters are experiencing similar things. I can't say whether, sort of comparable to primary care, but certainly I've had some of those examples reported to me recently.
Thanks, Louise. So we'll take the final two questions, first from Edwin and then from Chris Marks. Edwin.
Thank you, Andy. Looking at slide 17, and as I said last time, equality and diversity is such a big area, so it's important to have these measurable, if you like, initiatives like recruitment practices and mentorship program. Is that still in development, or is it something that has already started, mentorship program for BME staff and disability awareness campaign? And also when I worked for East London NHS Trust, I remember Stonewall Workplace Equality Index was quite useful measure for sexual orientation initiatives. Has that been considered?
Yeah, we are a Stonewall employer, so we have been for a number of years, and that means that we are obliged to, as you know, comply with certain codes of practice in terms of our employment. The mentorship program for our BME staff has started. That's something that we are very keen to make sure we are supporting people and finding good mentors and role models that people can work with. We've got quite a big program of work to think about how we attract, recruit and promote people, and whether there are opportunities for us to find a way to be more inclusive in that, and certainly to think about what the data is telling us about where some of the issues are. So the most recent piece of information is something called the ratio disparity metric, which talks about to what extent somebody from an ethnic minority background is less likely to be promoted than somebody from a white background, and identifying where those issues are within your workforce. So what does that mean then in terms of how we advertise, how we support people to write their applications and to sell themselves appropriately, how we support panels to make sure that they're not bringing unnecessary bias to the questions that they're asking, and all of those things. A really important part of our programme of work this year, Edwin.
Thank you, Louise. No, that's very important.
Thank you. And Chris, you get the last question in this section as well.
Wow. Thank you, Andy. Louise, I just really wanted to, as I have done on PEG, is highlight the positives. I think it's very, very easy to dive into the negatives, and clearly you, Marcin, everyone is aware of the equality, diversity, and this bullying violence issue. But I think there is an amazing achievement to be celebrated within the trust in that staff engagement at a time when there has never been greater pressure in hospitals, and I think there should be a great deal of recognition attributed to the achievements, and I just wanted to record that. We're very quick to criticise and slow to praise.
Thank you, Chris. Very well said.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I mean, and I guess from my perspective, that's down to how every line manager and every colleague in the organisation has stepped up to try and support one another during this really difficult time. The health and wellbeing interventions we've put in place, but then people's ability to be able to access them and look after their colleagues and make sure that they are looking after themselves in what has been a really difficult time. So I would agree, and not take any credit for it personally, but it's about how people have worked as a team.
Yes. Andy, you could consider that as my Bertie memorial phrase.
Yes, thank you. Great, thank you very much for that, Louise. I'm going to move on to, we will catch up in the closed meeting, by the way. I know we're 10 minutes over, but we've got a very light closed agenda. Any other business? I've not been notified of any. No. Okay. So the date of the next meeting will be Wednesday, the 1st of September, between 4 and 6. We hope that might be a face-to-face meeting. Let's pray for that. I'm going to close this meeting now. So anybody who, if there are any members